Hey there. Welcome to this deep dive into the world of academic writing. We're going beyond grammar rules and stuff. This time we're diving into some fascinating psychology today.
Ooh, I love that.
So you shared some excerpts from a Chinese translation of Write No Matter What by Joli Jensen,
Yeah.
and we're excited to explore them with you.
Absolutely. These excerpts offer some really practical advice for academics at all stages. Whether you're a grad student facing a dissertation or a seasoned professor working on a book, we've got some insights that might help you overcome those common writing hurdles.
Yeah, there's this, romanticized image of the academic life.
Hmm.
All quiet contemplation and effortless brilliance.
Right.
But I think we both know it's rarely that idyllic.
It's true. Jensen really nails the reality of academic life. The pressure to publish, the fear of failure, the constant juggling of research, teaching, and of course, writing. It all adds up.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember going down to the basement archives of our university library a while back, and I stumbled upon a stack of old dissertations, including one from my own mentor.
Oh, that's right. You told me about this.
Yeah.
It really shifted your perspective, didn't it?
It did. In my mind, these dissertations were these monumental works of genius.
Hmm.
But seeing them there stacked up, they just looked like regular old books. It was oddly comforting. Like suddenly, the whole dissertation process felt a lot less intimidating.
That's a perfect example of how we tend to mystify academic writing. We set these impossibly high standards and then get paralyzed by the fear of not meeting them.
Right. It's like we're all supposed to be these solitary geniuses churning out masterpieces.
Yeah.
No wonder so many of us struggle to get started, let alone finish anything.
Exactly. And this is where Jensen's approach is so refreshing. She encourages us to ditch that artistic genius myth and embrace a more, dare I say, human approach to writing. She calls it a craftsman mindset.
I like that, a craftsman mindset. So instead of waiting for inspiration to strike, we focus on honing our skills like a carpenter or a potter.
Yeah.
Right.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that writing is a craft, not a mystical talent. It requires practice, patience, and a willingness to experiment. Jensen points to sociologist C. Wright Mills, who, despite being known for his incredibly insightful work, stressed the importance of good work habits above all else.
That's so interesting. It really emphasizes the importance of consistent effort and dedication to the craft.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put this craftsman mindset into practice? It's easy to talk about good habits, but sticking to them, well, that's another story altogether.
That's where Jensen's taming techniques come in. She offers 3 really practical strategies for taking control of the writing process and minimizing those feelings of overwhelm and anxiety.
Let's break those down because I think they could be game changers for a lot of our listeners.
Absolutely. The first one is creating a project box. Think of it as your dedicated writing command center.
I love that, like a physical manifestation of your project.
Exactly. It can be a physical box, a folder, or even a digital space. But the key is to gather all your materials, notes, drafts, outlines, everything related to this particular writing project in one place. This not only keeps you organized, but also helps to contain that mental clutter that can often lead to procrastination.
So it's about externalizing those swirling thoughts and anxieties,
Yeah.
right? Getting them out of your head and onto paper or into a folder, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of externalizing those anxieties, this is where Jensen's second taming technique comes in, the ventilation file.
Ah, yes, the ventilation file. I've heard you mention this before. It's like a journal where you vent all your writing frustrations, right?
Exactly. It's a dedicated space to unleash all those negative thoughts, fears, and self-doubts that can sabotage your writing. The I'm not good enough, this will never get published, everyone will think I'm an idiot kind of thoughts.
Right. It sounds almost therapeutic, like you're acknowledging those negative
Right.
emotions instead of trying to ignore them.
Exactly. By getting them out of your system and onto the page, they lose some of their power. It's like letting the steam out of a pressure cooker.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so we have our project box, our ventilation file. What's the third taming technique?
The third technique is deceptively simple, but incredibly powerful. Commit to writing for at least 15 minutes every day.
I have to admit, when I first heard this, I thought, 15 minutes, that's it. But then I actually tried it, and I was amazed by how much I could accomplish in those short bursts of focused writing.
Exactly. It's about consistency over intensity. Research shows that regular, even short writing sessions are far more effective than sporadic marathon sessions. Plus, it helps build momentum. Once you get started, you might find yourself writing for much longer than 15 minutes.
It's almost like tricking your brain into thinking that writing isn't this big, scary task. It's just 15 minutes, no big deal. And then suddenly you're in the flow and the words are coming back.
Right, and those small wins, those consistent writing sessions, they build confidence and create a sense of accomplishment. It's about proving to yourself that you can make progress even on the busiest of days.
Okay, so we have our tools, our mindset, but I think a lot of academics struggle with actually finding the time to write. We're all so busy with teaching, research, committees, emails. It feels like there's never enough time in the day.
You're absolutely right. Time management is a huge challenge for academics. But Jensen offers some really practical advice for reclaiming your time and making writing a priority.
I'm all ears because I know I'm guilty of falling into that when I get caught up trap, thinking once I finish grading these papers or prep for that lecture, then I'll have time to write.
Oh, I know that trap all too well. The mythical land of when I get caught up. It's so alluring, but also incredibly dangerous.
Because it never actually arrives, right? There's always something else demanding our attention.
Exactly. So Jensen recommends a brilliant exercise called the reverse schedule. Instead of listing everything you need to do, you actually track what you spend your time on for a week or two.
Ooh, that sounds eye-opening. I feel like I might not like what I discover.
It can be a bit of a reality check, but it's incredibly valuable. It helps you identify those time-wasting activities and see where your priorities actually lie.
I did this a while back, and I was shocked by how much time I was spending on email. It felt urgent, but in reality, it was often just busy work.
It's a common trap. We mistake urgency for importance. And those seemingly urgent tasks often end up eating away at the time we could be spending on more meaningful work, like writing.
So how do we break free from this cycle of urgency and reclaim our time for writing?
Well, Jensen argues that we need to make writing a non-negotiable priority, not something we squeeze in when everything else is done. She suggests scheduling dedicated writing time, even if it's just for short periods, and treating those appointments as sacred.
I like that. It's like booking an appointment with your most important client, yourself.
Exactly. And, sometimes even with dedicated time set aside, it can be hard to actually focus on writing, especially when you're surrounded by distractions.
That's so true. I know a lot of academics dream of having that perfect writing space. A quiet study with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a view of a tranquil garden.
Right.
But in reality, most of us are writing at our kitchen tables or in coffee shops or even, in my case, on my enclosed porch.
Well, I have to say your porch sounds quite charming. And, Jensen actually talks about her own experience with various writing spaces, including a vintage camper van. So it's not about having the perfect environment, but about creating a space that works for you, a space that signals to your brain, okay, it's time to write now.
I love that she wrote in a camper van. It speaks to the idea that you can write anywhere, as long as you have that dedicated space and the right mindset.
Yeah, exactly. It's about creating boundaries, both physical and mental. And speaking of mental boundaries, let's talk about energy management. Because even with the right mindset, tools, and a dedicated space, if you're exhausted, it's going to be really hard to write effectively.
This is where it gets interesting because we all have different energy patterns throughout the day, right? Some people are morning people, others are night owls. So how do we align our writing schedule with our natural energy levels?
That's such a good point. Jensen introduces the concept of A, B, and C time. A time is your peak energy time, the time when you're most alert and focused. This is the time to tackle those challenging tasks that require your full mental capacity, like writing.
Okay, so A time is prime writing time. What about B and C time?
B time is for less demanding tasks, things that still require focus but don't drain your energy quite as much. And then C time is for low energy activities, routine tasks, things you can do on autopilot.
So for me, mornings are definitely my A time. That's when I feel most creative and energized. That's when I schedule my writing sessions.
That makes perfect sense. It's about working with, not against, your natural rhythms. Now, even with all these practical strategies in place, there's another layer of complexity that we need to address. The psychological barriers to writing.
Right, because sometimes even when we have the time, the space, and the energy, we still find ourselves procrastinating or second-guessing ourselves or just plain feeling stuck.
It's like there's this invisible force field preventing us from actually getting the words down on the page.
And I think that's where Jensen's work is so valuable because she really delves into the psychological and emotional aspects of writing.
Absolutely. She encourages us to confront those limiting beliefs and negative self-talk that can sabotage our writing progress. Remember that ventilation file we talked about earlier? Well, that can be a really useful tool for uncovering those hidden myths and anxieties that are holding us back.
So it's like using the ventilation file not just to vent our frustrations, but also to do some self-reflection and identify those negative thought patterns.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah.
But what are some of the common writing myths that we need to watch out for?
Well, Jensen highlights several, and I think these will resonate with a lot of academics out there.
Let's dive into those because I think this is where things get really interesting.
One of the most common and insidious myths is the myth of the masterpiece. This is the belief that our writing must be groundbreaking, transformative, and utterly original in order to be valuable.
Oh, I know that one all too well. Especially when I was working on my dissertation, I felt this immense pressure to produce something that would revolutionize the field. It was paralyzing.
It's understandable. Academia often rewards those big, bold ideas. But the truth is, most of us contribute to knowledge in smaller, more incremental ways, and that's perfectly okay.
So how do we break free from this masterpiece myth and start seeing value in those smaller contributions?
Jensen suggests reframing academic writing as a conversation. Think of it as adding your voice, your insights, your unique perspective to an ongoing dialogue. She talks about her own mentor, James W. Carey, who often described academic work as participating in a conversation that spans generations.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. It takes the pressure off of having to come up with some earth-shattering new theory and allows us to focus on building on the work of those who came before us.
Exactly. It's about contributing to the collective knowledge of our field, not about reinventing the wheel. Now, another common myth that trips up a lot of academics is the imposter myth. This is that nagging feeling that we're not as smart or capable as others think we are, that we're just faking it, and eventually we'll be found out.
Oh, imposter syndrome. I think almost every academic I know has struggled with this at some point in their career. It's like this constant fear of being exposed as a fraud.
And it can be incredibly debilitating. It can lead to perfectionism, procrastination, and even self-sabotage. We might avoid submitting our work for publication or shy away from challenging projects because we're afraid of failing.
So what's the antidote to this imposter syndrome? How do we silence that inner critic and start believing in ourselves?
Well, first of all, it's important to acknowledge that imposter syndrome is incredibly common, especially in academia, and it often affects the most successful and accomplished among us. So if you're struggling with these feelings, you're definitely not alone.
That's good to hear, though. It's always surprising to me how many brilliant people secretly feel like they're not good enough. It's almost like it comes with the territory.
It does seem that way, doesn't it? And I think part of the reason is that academia is so competitive and achievement-oriented. We're constantly being evaluated and compared to our peers.
So how do we break free from this cycle of comparison and self-doubt? Because it doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon.
Well, Jensen encourages us to be vulnerable and to talk about these feelings with trusted colleagues. Sharing our experiences with others can help us realize that we're not alone in our struggles.
That's so important. It's like breaking the silence and creating a space where we can be honest about our challenges without fear of judgment.
Right, because often just acknowledging those feelings of inadequacy can take away some of their power. And remember, those feelings of self-doubt can actually be a sign that you care deeply about your work and that you're striving to do something meaningful.
That's a really interesting way to reframe it.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing imposter syndrome as a weakness, we can see it as evidence of our commitment to our field.
Exactly. It's about shifting our perspective and focusing on our contributions rather than our perceived shortcomings. Now, there's another myth that Jensen tackles that's related to time management, and it's one we touched on earlier, the "I'll write when I get caught up" myth.
That elusive land of when I get caught up. The problem is, it doesn't exist, does it?
Not really. There's always going to be something else to do. Another email to answer, another committee meeting to attend. If we wait for a time when we have absolutely nothing else on our plates, we'll never write.
So how do we break free from this waiting game and actually make writing a priority?
It's about reframing writing not as something we squeeze in when everything else is done, but as a source of fulfillment, a way to engage with ideas we care about. Jensen compares it to walking the dog. Life might be busy, but we make time for it because it's important and it brings us joy.
I love that analogy. It makes it so much more relatable. It's about finding those pockets of time, even if they're short, and treating them as sacred writing time. No distractions, no excuses.
Exactly. And even when we have the time and the motivation, there's another psychological barrier that can trip us up: the fear of criticism.
Oh, yes. The dreaded peer review process. It can be incredibly intimidating, especially for early career academics.
It's natural to feel anxious about sharing our work with others, especially when those others are experts in our field who have the power to accept or reject our submissions.
Yeah, I remember feeling like every reviewer was just waiting to tear my work apart. It made me so hesitant to submit anything, even when I knew it was good.
It's a common fear, and it can lead to all sorts of negative consequences. We might write defensively, trying to anticipate and address every possible criticism, or we might avoid submitting our work altogether.
So how do we manage this fear of criticism and start seeing it as a constructive part of the writing process? Because it's not like we could just avoid it altogether.
Well, Jensen suggests reframing criticism as an opportunity for growth. Think of it as feedback, not judgment. It's a chance to get valuable insights from experts in your field who can help you strengthen your arguments and refine your writing.
That's a really helpful way to think about it. Instead of seeing reviewers as adversaries, we can see them as colleagues who are invested in helping us improve our work.
Exactly. And remember, even the most celebrated scholars have faced rejection and criticism along the way. It's part of the process.
That's reassuring. It's like remembering that we're all in this together, that writing is a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And speaking of journeys, I think it's time to shift gears a bit and talk about something that can really enhance our writing: energy management. We've talked about time management, but managing our energy is just as important, especially when it comes to a mentally demanding task like writing.
That makes sense. I know for me, if I try to write when I'm feeling tired or burnt out, it's just not going to happen, or at least it's going to be a really painful process.
Exactly. Remember those A, B, and C times we discussed earlier? Well, aligning our writing tasks with our peak energy periods can make a huge difference in our productivity and our overall enjoyment of the writing process.
So if I know that I'm most alert and creative in the mornings, I should schedule my writing sessions for then, even if it means getting up a little earlier or rearranging my schedule.
Exactly. And if you find yourself hitting a wall in the afternoon, that might be a good time to switch to those B or C tasks, like answering emails, grading papers, or doing some light reading.
It's about being strategic with our energy and recognizing that we don't have to be on all the time.
Exactly. It's about working with our natural rhythms, not against them. And sometimes those dips in energy can actually be a sign that we need to step away from our work and take a break.
That's so true. I know I used to feel guilty about taking breaks, like I was somehow slacking off. But now I realize that those breaks are essential for recharging and coming back to my work with fresh eyes.
Absolutely. Taking breaks, whether it's a short walk, a cup of tea, or even a quick nap, can actually boost our productivity in the long run.
So it's not about pushing ourselves to the limit, but about finding a sustainable pace that allows us to produce high-quality work without burning ourselves out.
Exactly. It's about creating a healthy and sustainable writing practice that supports our well-being and allows us to thrive as academics.
And that brings up another point that Jensen makes about the importance of creating a supportive writing community. Because writing can be such a solitary activity, it's easy to feel isolated and discouraged, especially when we're struggling.
That's so true. Having a network of colleagues who understand the challenges of academic writing can make a world of difference. These are the people who can offer encouragement, feedback, and accountability.
And sometimes just knowing that you're not alone in your struggles can be enough to get you through those tough writing days.
Exactly. So whether it's a formal writing group, a casual coffee chat with a colleague, or even just an online forum where you can connect with other writers, finding those supportive connections can be a game changer.
So it's not just about the practical strategies and the mindset shifts, but also about cultivating those relationships that can sustain us throughout our writing journeys.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture of support and encouragement that can help us thrive as academic writers.
And that brings us back to something you said earlier about the craftsman mindset. It's about embracing the process, the ups and downs, the challenges and the triumphs.
Exactly. It's about approaching writing with curiosity, patience, and a willingness to learn and grow. And remember, even the most experienced writers have days when the words don't flow or the ideas seem elusive.
So it's about being kind to ourselves, accepting that writing is a process, and trusting that we'll eventually find our way through those challenging moments.
Exactly. And sometimes those challenging moments can lead to the most unexpected breakthroughs.
That's so true. It's like when you're struggling with a particular passage or argument, and then suddenly something clicks and everything falls into place.
It's those moments of clarity and insight that make the writing process so rewarding. And remember, those moments often come after a period of struggle and frustration.
So it's about embracing the whole process, the good and the bad, and trusting that it will all lead to something meaningful in the end.
Absolutely. And, as we wrap up this deep dive into effective academic writing, I think it's important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. What works for one writer might not work for another.
That's a great point. We've explored a lot of different strategies and techniques, but it's really about finding what works best for you, your personality, your writing style, and your particular circumstances.
Exactly. It's about experimenting, being open to new ideas, and customizing those ideas to fit your own needs. And remember, writing is a skill that develops over time. The more you practice, the more confident and proficient you'll become.
So don't be afraid to make mistakes,
Mm.
to try different approaches, and to seek feedback from trusted colleagues.
And most importantly, don't give up. Writing can be challenging, but it can also be incredibly rewarding.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into effective academic writing, we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question. What one small step can you take today to move your writing forward? It doesn't have to be a huge undertaking.
Right.
Even just 15 minutes can make a difference.
Yeah, even just the act of creating that project box or
Mhm.
starting your ventilation file can be incredibly empowering. It's a way of signaling to yourself that you're serious about making writing a priority.
And if you're feeling really stuck, remember Jensen's advice about committing to just 15 minutes of writing each day. It's a small commitment,
Yeah.
but it can have a big impact.
It really can. And, something I found helpful is to set a timer for those 15 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
It helps me stay focused and avoid getting sidetracked. Plus, there's something about that ticking clock that really gets the words flowing.
I like that. It's like a little challenge to yourself.
Yeah?
See how much you can get done in that short burst of time.
Right.
And who knows, you might even find yourself writing for longer than 15 minutes once you get into the groove.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that writing doesn't have to be perfect, especially in those early stages. Just get the ideas down on the page. You can always go back and revise and edit later.
That's a great point. I know I used to get so hung up on trying to write the perfect sentence or the perfect paragraph that I would end up procrastinating for days, even weeks. But now I realize that it's much better to just get something down,
Yeah.
even if it's messy, and then go back and refine it later.
Exactly. It's like sketching out a rough draft before painting the final masterpiece. You need that initial framework to build upon.
And that brings us back to the idea of the craftsman mindset.
Right.
It's about embracing the process,
Yeah.
the messiness, the imperfections.
Ah.
It's about showing up each day and doing the work, even when it's hard.
And I think it's also about celebrating those small wins along the way.
Oh, that's so important.
Don't wait until you've published a book or won an award to acknowledge your progress. Celebrate those finished drafts, those accepted submissions, those moments of clarity and insight.
That's such a great point.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the pursuit of the next goal, the next milestone,
Yeah.
that we forget to appreciate the journey itself.
Exactly. And celebrating those small wins can help us stay motivated and keep moving forward even when the going gets tough.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into effective academic writing,
Yeah.
we want to leave you with this. Be kind to yourself, embrace the process, and never stop learning and growing as a writer.
And remember, you have the power to create a writing practice that is both productive and fulfilling.